All right, guys, week 7, session 7. We're most of the way there. Blows me away. I wouldn't think that we could make it, but here we are. So we're going to be talking about insurance and some funding tonight as well. Some, as you know, one of my favorite topics, banking. So the agenda for tonight, we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping like I do every single week. And then we're going to have a presentation from Paul from Westland. We're going to have a quick break, and then we're going to have a couple people, Angela and Sherry are the two that are presenting from RBC, but we also are joined by Aaron. And then I'm going to talk a little bit at the end, because you guys know that I like that. So, first things first, you guys know what's next? Just one time? Just one time. All together. Hey, that was pretty good. I think that next week it's going to be perfect, and I'm going to be really impressed with that. So let's talk a little bit about last week. I thought a couple of great presentations. We had Stephen Mogden from Stringham, who I think is always, I sent him an email afterwards, and I always find it interesting the questions that people think to ask a lawyer when they sit down in a room with them. It wasn't as crazy as we've had in years past. I think you got a couple of weird questions last year too, which is always interesting. But we also talked about cash flow with Bruce Thurston. And I know how many of you have actually set up appointments and gone to meet Bruce or are going to meet Bruce? Quite a few, right? He's an interesting guy, and he's a really, really knowledgeable guy, especially in terms of cash flow. So what were you guys' takeaways? Something that is burning with you all week, yeah.
I met with Bruce this afternoon, and I've known about TechNet for a few years, but I thought it was a tech thing. So if your business wasn't tech related, they couldn't really help me. And that's totally not the case.
Yeah, they're a division of EDL, Economic Development Lethbridge, and they're all about helping small businesses of any kind, right? And that facility, for those of you that haven't gone there, they do Ask Me Anything courses, usually at least once a month, where they bring specialists in that talk about any number of things. We're going to be joined by Bill Halley next week, who's a member of RINSA. He's with Alberta Innovates Technology Futures. He's a really interesting guy. He works a lot with entrepreneurs to help them get their business started as well, and he kind of works out at Tech Connect in the college as well. And he'll talk a little bit about this, but I highly suggest that you guys reach out because they have resources like Bruce. And Bruce, I mean, when you're talking about technology, that's not necessarily where Bruce's experience lies.
There's one on March 21st on marketing.
March 21st on marketing. And they're hooked up with BusinessLink too. You guys remember the presentation from BusinessLink? Yeah, kind of, a little bit. We'll go back and rewatch it. It was good. And they bring their specialists in, usually with those events where you can sit down with them every day, or not every day, but for an entire day. Talk to them for an hour that day and get their feedback. And these are people that are, you know, in that presentation, I mean, you guys remember that app she was talking about that she developed? That I just smiled and kind of nodded along with when she was describing how it worked and what it did. To get someone like that to sit down with you and talk to you about some of these parts of your business that you don't understand for free, it takes an hour of your time, that's it. I think that's a pretty good trade-off. Any other takeaways from last week? I'm going to share mine anyways, because you guys know that I love to do that. The legal side, man, it's a headache. The legal side of things is a whole headache when you're dealing with business. And I can't tell you, like, I asked that patent reason very specifically, because how many of you guys have seen Dragon's Den? I always use Dragon's Den as a reference, right, because it's universal. But where they've asked them, oh, how much have you sunk into this business? And it's the stupidest little product that, you know, this is the next plunger. And they're like, oh, how much have you spent? And they're like, oh, $5 million. So had to get a patent. And the first thing that the dragons say is, well, no, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, and they're out. And it's very similar. You don't necessarily need stuff like that. Sometimes it's not worth it. But it's really worth it to talk to a specialist. And I don't know if you guys picked it up from talking to Stephen last week, but he's a guy that can make you understand that type of thing, which is what I said when I kind of insulted him at the beginning about lawyers. But surround yourself with specialists. And cash flow. Cash flow is king. It's everything in your business. We talked about it when I rambled at you guys for 2.5 hours. Profit does not equal cash flow. Just because on paper your business is making 15 grand net at the end of the year, it doesn't mean that month to month you have enough to pay your bills. That's what cash flow is about. It's about accounts receivable. If any of you are working with governments or bigger businesses, I hate to tell you, but they're going to drag it out as long as they can, 60 days, 90 days. I'm working with a guy right now that is waiting for a big company to pay him, company that's worth millions, and it's like $7,000, and he's at 120 days right now. They have the money, they just don't want to pay it right now. And there's not a lot that you can do to necessarily force that, so you need to plan for it. A lot of good businesses have failed on stuff like that. On a lighter note, if you plan for it, it helps you succeed. So without further ado, we're going to go off to our first presenter. So you guys know I like to let my presenters kind of talk a little bit for themselves. We're going to have Paul from Westland up here, and he's done this presentation we were talking earlier today. 4 years now that he's done this presentation with people, and this is another one of those things that a lot of people that I talk to, it blows your mind the businesses that people come up with, and they don't think about insurance and liability, and like, hey, let's go and do night laser tag in the coulees, and you're like, oh cool, what if somebody trips and sues you? And they're like, we didn't think about that, we're going to be a sole proprietor and put up our house. So Paul, I'm sure, has tons of stories about stuff like that. And so without further ado, let's give a big round of applause for Paul.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us here this evening. Great to see so many faces thinking about making the plunge into business ownership. Some of you probably already have, so that's great. I said I've been doing this presentation for a number of years. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself. I do have a business background myself. My wife and I own an interior design firm. She does pretty much all of that because I do insurance, but I do help her with the books and that side of stuff, so I do have an understanding from that perspective of what it takes to run a small business. I have a business degree. I am a commerce grad from the University of Manitoba. Won't tell you how long ago that was because I hope I still look younger than I am. And I've also attained my Chartered Insurance Professional designation and my Canadian Accredited Insurance Broker designation. So I think that leaves me well positioned to be a person to have a conversation with anybody in this room about what they're thinking and what that might mean insurance-wise. So just to get into the heart of the presentation. Insurance is a contract. It's a contract between two parties where one party basically promises to remunerate you in the event that you suffer a loss due to a certain hazard or a certain peril. And so there's various types of insurance. There's property insurance, liability insurance, and those are the two main things. And so you'll deal with business liability, auto liability, professional liability, and a number of other things as you get into your businesses. Not any one business is the same, and so just because one company is a bakery and another company is a bakery, what they face is not necessarily the same, depending on exactly how they roll out their business and the liabilities that come with that. So I can't read what's on the back there. It's really small. So why insurance? There's a number of reasons to buy insurance, other than the fact that it's just a prudent thing to do. There's going to be legal requirements that you have. Sometimes, for instance, automobile insurance is the most easy to understand legal requirement. In order to put a vehicle on the road, the government mandates you must have insurance. How much? A minimum of $200,000 liability, which nobody buys because people are smarter than that, and they know that getting into an accident and causing injuries to someone else is simply going to blow that kind of figure out of the water in a hurry. So, there are things like that where, like I said, where the government requires other obligations, quasi-legal, but the same contractual obligations, so contracts that you get into with your vendors, with your customers, in certain cases, contracts that hinge on whether or not you as a provider have insurance. You get into anything social services, healthcare, you're providing services to to the disabled, to at-risk individuals and so forth. You don't get to have a license, and you can't get a license or can't maintain a license unless you maintain insurance. You can't work with the government agencies and so forth unless you have insurance that meets what they require of you. So there's a number of things there. And then the big one for most businesses and the time that they decide to get insurance more often than not is in order to finance their risk. And that's where the banks generally tell you, if you want money, we want to make sure that you have it insured. It's not just about collateral, it's about making sure that if that collateral goes up in smoke, somebody's still gonna pay for it. So that's kind of the number one thing where people, small business owners, people that are first in business for themselves, come to someone like myself and say, somebody tells me I need to have insurance, and then the conversation starts in earnest about what your business is about and what it looks like and what types of insurance that your specific business will need. So the types of insurance that business owners will typically face are listed there on the screen. Automobile insurance, commercial general liability insurance, also known quite generally as just business liability insurance, property insurance, stock, inventory, contents, buildings, tools, other specialty equipment that you guys might need to use in your day-to-day operations, other specialty types of property insurance, some industries that you get involved in if you're going to operate some industries. There's such a number of participants in that type of industry that insurance companies have developed specialty packages for business owners in those types of industries. And then specialty liability insurance and surety bonding. Bonding is something that if anybody has questions about it down the later, feel free to send me an email or call me and I'll chat with you about it, but I'm not going to cover it tonight because it doesn't impact most unless you're getting into construction or manufacturing and you're operating on a fairly large scale. So, but specialty liability insurance, errors and omissions, malpractice liability, other types of professional liability, any types of businesses where you're providing advice, consulting, especially surrounding financial, those types of scenarios. Automobile insurance. So everybody in this room, whether you think you have an automobile insurance exposure for your business or not, you do. Even if you think, well, I'm not really doing anything, I'm not delivering goods, I'm just driving around, seeing customers, going to the bank, running my errands, and so forth. If you are a business owner, you must let your insurance provider know that you are using your business or your vehicle for business use. It is a rating factor that insurance companies use to determine the price of your insurance. And it is one of those few things that an insurance company can use called material misrepresentation, that if you do not disclose what you're using your vehicle for, and they determine at the time of a claim that you were using it for business and you've never disclosed, never allowed them to charge the appropriate premium for that, they can actually decline your claim, which isn't necessarily horrible if nobody's hurt and it's just your vehicle that has a fender bender. But if you hit somebody and they're hurt and their property is damaged and so forth, they get very expensive very fast and stay with you for a very long time. So something to make sure that all of you do. Commercial use, I like to say this is where having a vehicle is necessary for your business. Contractors, companies that deliver goods and so forth, they need to have a vehicle. They don't make money because they have that vehicle, but they need to use that vehicle to deliver their product to get the job done. And that is, so contractors, I've mentioned bakeries, florists, other small service firms, computer tech firms running around, going from place to place, servicing computer equipment and so forth. All of these have a commercial exposure to their business. And then professional use, anyone that makes money because of having a vehicle. So anything in transportation and logistics, whether you're a trucking firm or a taxi cab, limousine operator, any of those types of things, those are all professional use. You have a special type of driver's license to be able to operate those vehicles. and you need to have special auto insurance for those exposures. This is a lot of words that generally indicate that there's two main types of commercial general, or two main reasons to have commercial general liability or business liability. One is liability in tort, which is another way of saying you owe somebody a duty of care because you're in business. They expect a certain level of service from you that's reasonable because anybody else in your type of business would offer that level of care or that level of service to you, and you would be negligent if you did it differently. Not negligent if you did it differently in the sense that you were far superior in the service offerings that you provide, but that you didn't follow the same standards of care as is normally set out for an accountant or a lawyer or a contractor or a manufacturer of certain types of products and that sort of thing. So those things are there. Those are the types of things that other businesses, other individuals will potentially sue you for, allege that you have done something negligent that has caused them some sort of property damage or injury to their person, among other things. So things to be aware of, and for that reason there is no business, proprietor, partnership, corporation that doesn't have a liability exposure and doesn't need at least this level of insurance coverage. Limits of coverage is a different conversation that's more tailored to each individual business. This is just more of a general idea of what everyone needs. And then just in the bottom, liability and contract. As business owners, you will get into contracts with vendors, with clients, with financial institutions, with government, whatever the case might be, service providers, and you will be required to meet liability obligations. Sometimes you'll assume an obligation or a liability that company that you want to do business with is insisting that you take on because they don't want it. And if you don't take on that liability, they simply won't do business with you. That is common amongst contractors. It's common amongst service providers when you're dealing with healthcare and social services. Any of professional type services, accounting, lawyer, doctor, any of those types of things where you simply have liability in a contract that you've signed with your clients. Feel free to jump in with questions if you need some clarification, or if you have a specific question with respect to anything that I've said so far. Commercial property insurance, again, varying businesses are going to have different degrees of what they need for property insurance. Most home-based businesses, somebody that operates with a just a home office, just a phone and a computer and a desk and not much else, and everything else is just doing paperwork back and forth and helping your clients resolve issues that they can't do on their own. Might not have much more than a little bit of property that they would like to insure, stuff that they might think is covered by their house insurance because it's in the house, but it isn't because it's owned by the business, especially if you're incorporated and all of the receipts for everything that you've purchased are done in the company name. Insurance company on your house is not going to pay for that stuff. Little bit of a blurry line if you do operate as a proprietor in your home and you just use your desk and computer and so forth to continue doing your business. They very well may pay, but most house insurance policies would have a cap on how much business tools, equipment they would pay, and in most cases it's $5,000 is the limit. So if you have issues or property beyond that, you hold a bunch of inventory in your garage, for instance, because you have an online store, all of that stuff in your garage would be something that you want to consider insuring in case you have a fire or a flood or something along those lines. So you don't want to be out that financial resource, especially as a newer business, simply because it's really hard to recover from those things. And when you're dealing with financing, whether it be through Community Futures or a traditional lender, they require you to have property insurance so that if you do have something like this happen, you can recover and you can continue to operate and you can continue to repay the loans and so forth. So the types of property insurance, buildings, so if you own a building or are responsible because you've rented a building and the landlord has said, as part of the lease, we want you to insure the whole building, happens. Those building insurance is one area of property insurance. Contents, we said business equipment, stock, and so forth. Electronic data processing, that's really an old school term for your computer equipment, your office computing equipment, mobile or desktop, to deal with that. And then some businesses bring customer goods back and they take care, custody, or control of their customers' goods, doing furniture repair or something, carpet cleaning, where they bring, rugs and so forth back to the shop to steam them and clean them. Those types of scenarios where during that time that you have them, you're responsible, so you have to have those insured as well. So I think this gentleman up here had a question first.
No, go ahead. So if you haven't, let's say you're starting off and you're invited to go to different trade shows and community, handmade markets and things like that, is it usually the insurance responsibility for each individual table? Or is it the person who's hosting the event and selling the table space, is it their responsibility to ensure public insurability?
Both.
It's both, so.
Yes, and the reason it's both is because liability insurance is always a drill down to see who's ultimately responsible for something that happened. Okay, so the event coordinator that's hosting the event is going to have liability insurance in case things go catastrophically wrong. But they're also going to make sure that every individual vendor has liability insurance, because if that individual vendor is the reason everything went catastrophically wrong, they're going to drill down to that individual or that business to make sure. So it is always a scenario why I say every business needs to have liability insurance, because it's always a chase to the bottom to see who's going to hold the bag at the end. And every layer of liability insurance will come into play to defend you and or pay the ultimate judgment if it came down to a court mandated settlement of some kind. So does that answer your question?
Yep, it does.
Okay. Do you have another question from online, or?
No, I just, I really quickly wanted to point out, in terms of especially lenders, I have not seen a loan where we haven't required insurance, both commercial general liability, typically $2 million, and then a life insurance collaterally assigned to Community Futures for however, for however much you're borrowing. It's for the bus test that we talked about, right? Where if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, what happens to your business? Does it keep making money? That's what the insurance is for, really, at the end of the day. And I've even seen some businesses where the board took a look at it and said, this is really risky. I feel like we can only do this if they do $5 million in liability insurance, because there's a lot of inherent risk in this specific industry. So it's something really important to kind of keep in mind as you build your plans.
Yeah, and I'll expand on that. Generally speaking, for a number of years, people have been purchasing probably $1 million in liability, thinking that that's adequate. In the last 10, 15 years, $2 million has become the norm for business liability. In the last couple of years, we're seeing a lot of push, especially when dealing in larger projects, for a minimum of $5 million and often 10, depending on the type of business and the type of liability that you are getting into. We have personally some clients that carry upwards of 25 million because they're getting into some very large manufacturing or construction and so forth, and the property and so forth that they have at risk is just simply, for instance, a roofing contractor that is going to re-roof Park Place Mall. So they're going to do a hot tar job on the roof. They're applying fire to the building to eventually make it watertight. but they're applying fire to the building. Even 25 million on that building, if it were to continue to burn in its entirety, would not be enough, right? But, so, you know, beyond that, you start dealing with some specialty type of liability, excess liability, umbrella liability, and so forth, to get limits really high. For most small businesses, you don't deal there. A lot of businesses grow, usually over a number of years, and as they grow, their liabilities increase. The things that they do get riskier because, you know, you get to the point where you're like, I can take the next step, but every time you take the next step, something gets a little bit riskier. One, because you don't necessarily have the experience to do it at that level, but you're willing to take the risk because you're entrepreneurs. It's great. Somebody has to eventually take and make that step up, but it doesn't mean you don't do it smartly. So those are some very good points. Yes?
We actually sat down with an insurance person last week,
Mhm.
and so when she was going through the requirements to see if somebody would take on our insurance, whatever, she asked us how much the business could potentially make in the year. So does that make a difference in how much we pay for insurance, how much money the business makes?
To a degree. And so the reason that an insurance broker or insurance company will ask you that question is first they'll figure out what industry you belong in as far as a standard industrial coding for Canada. And when they figure out what industry you belong in, then they want to understand how big your operation is. And for some businesses, types of businesses, the best judgment of how big your business is, how much it's doing, how much liability exposure you will have out there is on your gross sales. We rarely would ever ask you about anything as far as cost of goods or profit or any, because we don't really care
Well, she did
from
ask
that
how much, like,
perspective.
if we were gonna have, like, contents, right, and we
Mhm.
wouldn't really have content,
Right.
what we were doing. But she did ask us how much we thought the business was gonna make a year.
Right.
And we both sat there and went, so we
Yeah.
just, we, like, the three of us, my partner and then the insurance person, we guessed a number.
Mhm.
And so I've never obviously done that before, so I wasn't sure why she asked.
Yeah, so it's really just a measure of figuring out, one, what business, or what size of business you are.
So if the number went up, potentially how much we pay for insurance. would
The
go up.
liability insurance will go up as you continue to have more. So if you are a restaurant generating, you know, $250,000 in sales a year versus a restaurant chain such as, you know, Earl's or something that's tens of millions of dollars a year, the insurance perspective is going to be different. But it's also a factor of understanding that the reason that you have liability or sales as large is because you have multiple locations. You're much bigger. You have a whole lot more traffic, and therefore more slip and fall exposure with customers coming and going, more exposure to bodily injury for sickness because food's not been prepared properly, and all of those types of things that can all be understood once insurance companies do all of their algorithms and so forth to figure out, okay, this business in this industry means this if they're doing this. They'll also ask you how many employees you have and a number of other things because they'll want to know
How many
this
would-
business is doing 5 million, but they have 2 employees, and in this industry, that doesn't make sense, so what's not right? And it's, right?
So typically, after your first year of business, if it's a brand new business, they sit back down and go, what did you actually bring in, and let's readjust your insurance plan?
Yeah, so a good insurance broker should be, just like your financial planner and everything else, should be reviewing that with you every year when it's coming up for renewal. And if you're in a complex business, multiple times a year, because things change, right? You'll get into an economic slump like Alberta's been in for a while, and a company that's been doing $10-15 million in revenue a year because the oil patch has been doing great is now doing $500,000 in revenue and branching into construction because they got to try to keep the lights on. So things change, and so you've always got to, just like with your accountant, your lawyer, your banker, and so forth, your insurance broker is on your team and trying to help you manage the risks that you're getting into and finding the products that are right for you or possibly new that you never thought you might need. And so those are the types of things that you want to have a conversation. about, so. Like I said, some industries will have specialty packages built for them because there are, you know, like for instance, contractors. Lots of packages out there. Every insurance company out there has a package for contractors. They're not all the same. That's part of the reason you talk to an insurance professional to understand, okay, well, here's 7 different packages you could buy, but here's why this one is the right one for you. Sometimes it's a price consideration for you because you're in business and your cash flow is not great. Sometimes it's because a contract that you want to get into requires that you have a specific type of insurance that's only contained in package B. And so we can go through all of those things with your insurance professional to go through that. Business interruption, quite often included, similar to the bus test that Jason was talking about. If you were to get hit by a bus, not only to satisfy the lenders and so forth with life insurance or disability insurance, but if you're the controlling mind of the company, or you have a fire and you can't operate from your place of business, how long does it take for your business to return to profitability? Lots of businesses can recover in the short term and go to operate only to find they have no capital left to operate. And if they had business interruption insurance to pay their ongoing expenses while they were shut down and so forth, they can recover. Business interruption insurance pays for necessary, if you have an interruption and you have to let a number of employees go and you have to pay severance, business interruption can take care of that. And so a number of other things to consider.
Does insurance cover theft? Like if somebody steals a crap ton from you, is that an insurance thing?
Yes, most property insurance policies, and you have to have property insurance, not just liability, right? So if you don't buy the property insurance, then no. But if you've bought property insurance, theft is a peril that is covered by most, if not all, policies that are sold nowadays. So, course of construction is really contractor specific or owner. If you're building a building and you want to insure that property while it's being built, that's a very specific type of insurance. So, some other types of insurance, errors and omissions or professional liability coverage. So if your business is advice-based, if people are hiring you and relying on your advice or a specific set of professional skills that you have that the general public doesn't. So if you've gone to school for a long time and earned a type of license or designation, myself, insurance broker or an accountant, a lawyer, et cetera, that you wouldn't go to just anybody to ask that type of advice. You would go to a designated professional. If you're looking to get into any of that type of space as a business owner, that's an additional type of insurance to buy over and above your general liability insurance. Environmental impairment or pollution liability, very similar. We'll just call them the same for the sake of this argument, but if you're getting into anything where you're in a business that has potential to release pollutants or accidental spillage of something, say you're a backhoe operator and your hydraulic line on your backhoe breaks and you spill a whole bunch of hydraulic fluid onto a job site and you're in an environmentally sensitive area, the costs of cleanup can escalate very, very quickly. Fines, judgments against you for all types of things. One example that I like to give, and the reason for the photo, is had a transportation client that was just shipping a big tanker truck full of milk. They had an accident on a bridge and the milk spilled into the river. And what we found out was that milk actually takes all the oxygen out of the water. So it killed all the fish. And they had whatever the Canadian version is of the Environmental Protection Agency, fined them $750,000, right? So general business insurance, business liability doesn't include that. That is a separate type of insurance liability that you would want to, or liability that you would want to insure. Directors and officers liability, protects, if you're getting into a business with a number of partners, family or not, you want to consider the liability that you owe to each other as directors of the company. If one director makes a bad decision and goes off on their own and the other, and sewers the company, what recourse do the other two directors have, for instance, or 5 or 10? I've got a client right now, they've got 10 directors, none of them are related, they're all business owners in town that have all come together to start a business, and they are, looking at that because all of them have their other businesses and so forth at stake. If somebody does something that potentially sewers this particular business and drags all of their other capital from their other businesses down with them. So you're gonna pay attention to that. Also, as business owners, you will start to get engaged in the community. You will start to get asked to sit on not-for-profit boards and so forth, and you want to consider whether or not those associations and so forth have directors and officers liability to protect you in the event that organization does something, as a group you do something that the membership generally didn't appreciate. Or you may sit on the board of your local church or the school board or something along those lines. In all of those situations, you put your personal self at risk. And so you want to make sure that that organization has put something in place to protect you, and so that you can rest easy that not only are you doing things well or good for the community, but you're protected in doing so. I thought I saw a hand over here. Yes.
So you were talking about specialty liability insurance regarding accountants and insurance and stuff like that. Would that also include like psychology, like counseling and
Yes, so
coaching?
coaching, nursing, swimming instructors, if you've got certain levels of coaching, certification, if you are dealing at high level sports, pretty much anything that has earned you credentials, actual credentials, not just, you've been swimming for, a long time and so now you are a master swimmer and you're going to teach at the Y, you're going to teach lessons. But if you've obtained coaching certifications and so forth, and you're going to turn that into a business and leverage that as the reason that you are an expert in what you do and why people should be spending their money with you, and you're doing high performance, and if they train with you, they're going to make the Olympic team or they're going to get a college scholarship or whatever the case. Anything where where people are buying into what your advice is, and you've got professional credentials behind you to be able to set yourself apart from the general public.
So if I had
That's
a
where you want to
psychology degree, then that would set me apart from a coach, like I would be both. So I would have to have liability?
So
Or-
a psychology degree is not a professional designation. Okay, a
So
psychology,
it's not like
no
a
different,
certificate
yeah.
for coaching, that's just like psychology degree.
Right, so what you would do, it's a question to ask the insurance professional that you sit down with to say, okay, here's what I'm doing, here's what I have, here's why I am different than, this other person that's going to do coaching or whatever. Do I have any exposure beyond just my general liability? And the insurance professional should be able to sit down with you and recognize what's professional credentials and what isn't. If you don't have professional credentials, because you have your psychology degree, but anybody that enrolls in university that decides to pursue that path and complete it can get that, as opposed to then taking it to the next step and becoming a psychologist and getting another level of education, or somebody that has a business degree like myself taking it to the next step and getting your accounting designation. Or
Okay, so once I get my master's, then I have to.
not necessarily, but it's as you generate more and more levels of expertise,
Okay.
you will at some point get a designation, PhD
Okay, so it would be.
or MD, or anything where you've kind of reached the pinnacle of what you can get education-wise in your particular field.
Thank you.
Okay? Yes.
So general liability would be the equivalent for errors and omissions for non-professionals who are out there like coaching or something.
Well, general liability is what every business needs.
Yeah,
If you reach a level of professional standing that requires additional insurance, then the professional liability. So whether you're a professional or not, you need to have the general liability.
Oh, yeah.
If you are a professional, you need to have that plus errors and omissions insurance or malpractice insurance if you're in the medical field, or any of the other, you know, lawyer and accountant have malpractice insurance.
yeah, and you just adjust your insurance, coverage according to where you are.
Yeah, and from an insurance perspective or a legal perspective, the reason for professional is because, you know, every business owes their customers or their vendors or suppliers a certain duty of care that is standard across society. Professionals are expected to have, you know, they know more, they're expected to do more. They're expected to perform at a higher level, they're expected to know their stuff, and the whole reason you talk to them in the first place is because they're not your neighbor, they're somebody that knows what they're doing. Alright, so in a very specific field, right? So for me, that's insurance. I wouldn't, as much as I talk about accounting and legal and so forth, because I deal with it every day, I'm not a lawyer or an accountant, and I would never give you legal or accounting advice, right? Because, and if I did, that's where my errors and omissions insurance would come in, because I gave you advice I shouldn't have, and you followed it and it didn't work out well, right? So that's kind of how that all comes together. And does that make sense for most? If you don't have, this is probably one of the more technical parts of insurance and getting it right. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer. So, and if you have questions at the end, coming back to that'd be great too. Commercial surety and contract surety. So I talked about surety bonding. Just really quickly to touch on commercial surety. Some types of businesses will require you, the government will require you to have a bond to protect your customers before they grant you your license. So if you're getting into even like a security guard, for instance, the attorney or the solicitor general for the province requires you to have a license bond. And so that's something that you would come to see an insurance person about, because the insurance companies that we deal with are also the companies that do bonding. So generally speaking, insurance professionals are the ones that deal with those types of things as well. And just real briefly on making purchasing decisions or how to make a purchasing decision. You can choose to deal with your regular insurance agent or an insurance broker. In a lot of cases, the function they perform is the same, and they give you the advice, they get the insurance in place for you. The difference between an agent and a broker is the insurance agent works for the insurance company, an insurance broker works for you. So we're not employees of insurance companies, we are independent providers of insurance that have relationships with insurance companies. So we get the information and we find you the right product with whichever insurance company is the best for your particular needs. An insurance agent can only sell you insurance from the company they represent. So you see that a lot more on the life insurance side. You know, you're going to have your Sun Life agent or your whoever who's going to provide you only their suite of products. On the general liability or the business insurance side, you will see AMA, Cooperators, and some of State Farm, some of these other insurance companies that you're probably familiar with. Those are all agents. They all work for those insurance companies. And aside from not being able to have a larger suite of products to offer you, the other key difference is that at the time of a claim, they work for the insurance company. They're not your advocate, they're not on your team. The insurance broker is supposed to be, and a good one will be, as far as, I don't understand what this guy is saying. They're not paying my claim. Why? They're denying this for this reason. Is that right? And that's where then we get involved and we talk to the claims people to help you navigate that. And that's something that an insurance broker brings to the table that an insurance agent cannot, because they work for the same, the same person signs that paycheck as the claims adjuster. So, and then just finally, one last thing, you want to consider your insurance person to be a trusted advisor the same way as your accountant, your lawyer, whoever. Just because someone to have it, you know, run scenarios by what does this expose me to if I pursue this, just so you can be prepared. We're not there to tell you don't do it. We're not there to tell you it's a crazy idea. We're there to tell you if you're going to do this, these are the exposures you face. This is how you protect yourself, and then you need to decide whether or not it's still worth it. You know, and I've got a client who manufactures archery targets. They want to sell into the United States. Product liability and so forth in the United States, far more litigious in the US than it is here. Something goes wrong, they will get sued. It's not a matter of let's try to work it out, and if it doesn't go well, we're going to talk to lawyers. It's we're going to sue you, and we'll let our lawyers sort it all out. That's how it works in the US. And so you need to understand that if you're going to send your products into the US, there's a bigger exposure. Your liability premiums will be higher, but you can still buy it, you can still go. You just need to understand how that fits into your cash flow and so forth. So you do not want your insurance professional to be an order taker. You do not want to phone up and say, I need this, this, and this, and just make it happen. Because if they can give you an insurance product based on that short of a conversation without talking to you about your overall business and finding out what you're all about, they're just in it to do a quick sale, quick commission, and they're not about being on your team. They're just, it should never be that easy. It shouldn't be frustrating. It should be a period of time where you have a half hour or an hour conversation where somebody's asking you really pertinent, relevant questions to your business, and hopefully you have a few aha moments and going, oh, okay, and move on. And take the opportunity to interview your insurance professional. Don't just phone up Westland or Western Financial Group or Schwartz, or I'm just naming some of the companies in town, and just assume that they gave you a quote, so they're good. That's not necessarily how that works. You just want to interview that person, take time to get to know them, see if they understand your business, and so forth. So that's all I have. I did leave some cards on the corner of the desk over here, so if anybody has questions, I make myself available to the group every year to answer questions. Send me an email, I will get back to you. Sometimes takes a few days because I do need to deal with my clients first, but as I have time, I will answer any questions or concerns. Make an appointment, sit down with me for half an hour, whatever. I'm not here to solicit business, I'm just here to give you kind of an overall view. So, does anybody have any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
So liability insurance, for my business, I am a certified life coach, which is branched into a specialized retirement coach where I coach professional athletes to become better speakers. That's what I do. I have about 14 retired NFL clients right now. And I also do motivational speaking. And I also do sport program for kids. I do sport programs for kids where they're, like today I'm day 2 of full days with 11-year-old kids and I'm dead tired. I don't know who you are anymore. But does my liability insurance for my one business cover all of that?
If you have separate entities, so if you have ABC company, 123 company, and yourself personally, you can build a policy to cover all of that if you combine everything. But if they're not combined, if they're not all the named insured on the policy, then no.
Okay.
And there are reasons why sometimes that makes sense to do it that way, and then there are reasons why it makes sense to keep them all separate and have a separate policy for each.
Okay. And are you a Bombers fan?
I am.
Oh, I can't do any business.
How did you know that?
He's not here.